shit. Here we go again.
You know what's wild? I made a whole video tearing into this game, and I'm not satisfied. So yeah, we're doing this again. This time I want to zoom out a bit. I want to talk about the design philosophy, the meta, the maps, and a player base that will sprint toward whatever requires the least amount of effort. All of it feeds into the same miserable experience. I want to start out with Siege again, because it's the clearest example of how badly the devs misread their own game and shows what mindset they really have. They inherited a Siege system that was almost perfect. It had depth, it had tension, it forced decisions. You could have tuned in a few numbers, like removing the extra spiggled range on 2 civs that had it, or just left it alone and let the growing civ pool naturally dilute the edge of those cases. Instead, though, they ripped it out and replaced it with the dumbest substitute system they could have come up with. The hubris and the arrogance in that is insane. You don't take a system that was holding the late game together, that made the Imperial Age actually interesting and fun, or one of the few things keeping matches unpredictable, and then swap it out for something that flattens everything into Cav good, everything else is cope. What makes it worse is the reaction to my video from people that unfortunately are just the player base. I've got a few people in my comments unironically defending the Siege changes, calling me low elo, like that magically makes the game better. It ignores the objective shit show Siege and the game has become. But the result is obvious. Before, you never quite knew how a game would play out generally, but now you do. They're either going full cavalry or they're going to rush you. That's it. That's the whole tree of possibilities now, and it's boring. For an RTS, that is a sin. Siege used to be the thing that forced variety. Now it's just another casualty of we know better than the game we inherited. That's just the devs. And once you understand what they did to Siege, the current meta makes perfect sense because it's built on top of that mistake. The game has basically boiled down to 2 playstyles, all-in rush or cavalry spam. If you don't do one of those, you're playing on hard mode, or your random teammates will quit if you don't support their rush. The Japanese are the perfect example of how off the rails the balance has become. They get monks that passively generate 25 gold every 60 seconds. That's super strong, but you could kind of work around that, I guess, because they take up pop. But then they get an upgrade that applies a 50% damage reduction debuff and a 10-mile radius lasting 60 seconds and reapplies every 6 seconds. In a game with a 1-to-1 armor system, that is insane. You're not just tweaking numbers at that point. You're breaking the fundamental math the game is built on. And instead of asking, is this mechanically healthy, the devs balance based off of usage. And this goes for every race. If something is popular, they buff around it. If something is underused, they assume it's weak. So Japanese gets cheaper barracks, which means it's easier to rush, 20% gold from mining stone, a resource they already need for their free eco anyway, and they get one of the strongest knights in the game. Just on top of that, so their late stage army is better than most people's. And 60% more food in feudal. I think they buffed that number down. But when they released, it was 60% food off of like 2 upgrades. Because why not turbocharge the early game even more? All of this in a meta that has already been rush dominated for over a year. They knew what the meta was. They knew people were already all inning. And they still push changes that make early aggression even more oppressive and even harder to punish. So now the quote-unquote correct way to play is rush them before they can breathe, or spam knights and dare them to have enough answers. And if you don't do that, you're just signing up to get run over, because every single game always is like this. Every game, and it's just so exhausting to play against when that wasn't the case over a year ago. If Siege is the symbol of their design arrogance, the ranked map pool is the proof that they're just doubling down on it. I mean, look at the pool over the last 6 or 7 seasons. It's stacked with rush favored maps or straight meme maps. There are like 3 maps that might as well have been rush here for free elo written in the description, and that's just in ranked. I'd say a large amount of the map pool is meme maps or rush maps over actually well-designed maps. And on top of that, they've reduced the number of bans you get every season. I think whenever I actually started taking ranked seriously and playing it, I had like 7 map bans. Last season it was 5, and this season it's 4. And nearly every map that's in the ranked pool is shit. The maps themselves are just bad. Every new one feels like a meme or some legacy map that never fit into AOE 4's pacing until they forced it with these, and I hesitate to even call them this, but balance updates. And then they just made the game worse to play after that. Also, they can accommodate these maps that just don't fit into AOE 4's or what was AOE 4's playstyle. They keep cutting down overall resources with these new maps. Less gold, less wood, without compensating anywhere else. There isn't more gold on a less wood intensive map. There's less gold and overall just less resources on a lot of the maps where they tweak gold. If they were trying to keep the game fresh, then I understand it, but they just don't. These are just changes for change's sake. They're always, more often than not, bad. It's not more competitive, it's just more volatile. To nerf the overall player's experience and put more restraints on the map, that doesn't make it more enjoyable or more competitive. It literally just dummies down the game even further and even further encourages rushing, because the longer the game goes, the less resources there are for the players anyway. It just pushes you toward early conflict because there's nothing to fall back on. All of the good maps in this game have an abundance of almost every resource in the game. They are big for the most part, and there's always a general flow to where the fighting should be. Those are well-designed maps. These new ones are just not that, and they're more often than not worse in every single way. And then there's the sheep mini game. I mean, this has been in the game since launch, and it's still one of the dumbest things in a quote-unquote competitive RTS. The opening minutes of the game are heavily influenced by RNG. You're punished if you don't know the 5 main sheep clusters on every map, and then there's 3 random variations inside of each of those clusters. Why is luck such a big factor in the beginning of a strategy game? Why am I punished for not memorizing spawn patterns instead of being rewarded for decision making, like going on to the map and getting the resources that are there? 90% of the deer and the berries are never touched. If you do go out on the map to get resources, then you're a fool, because a tower will not and never has stopped 3 knights trying to burn it down. This is with it upgraded too. Why should you be forced to mine 150 stone and 100 wood for every single deer patch on the map to get food when those resources can be destroyed with 5 knights instead of 3 once it's fully maxed out? It's just terrible game design. I know you're supposed to do farms, and that's the real food where you're supposed to go. But if that's the case, why are deer and berries even on the map in the first place? Each of those spots could just be another gold cluster or stone cluster. 90% of them are never touched. Ever. You look at the ranked map pool, and almost every map has some kind of gimmick. And maybe 2 of them feel like they belong in a serious ladder. And all of this leads to the player base, really. Meta locusts with 0 interest in effort. Because as much as I want to blame the devs, and I do, the community has absolutely sprinted to the bottom with this design. This is genuinely one of the most insufferable player bases I have ever seen in terms of how they respond to the meta. They don't just adapt to strong things. They abandon anything that requires effort the second a lower effort alternative appears. The 2 Glocks had healer elephants. That's all anyone did. Full rush, full cheese, no variation. The second that got nerfed, they didn't go, okay, what else can this civ do at the later stages of the game? It's, what else can this civ do to rush? They just migrated to feudal keep spam. 8-minute games where they slam a keep in your face, ruin the match for everyone, and then someone sits in the game for another 10 minutes just to drag it out. And that still hasn't been properly addressed, even though it's been a problem since the healer elephant nerf, which was months ago. Lancaster is another perfect example of this. Their orbital strike was busted. No wind up, no tell, no counterplay. And it's still like that, but it got nerfed. And the community immediately declares the civ unplayable. Meanwhile, their spearmen shred armor and stack that armor debuff per hit, which means that their yeomen can actually be armored units if you use them properly. They can beat any army in the game with this passive, but that requires micro, that requires intention. So the player base just drops the civ entirely instead of learning how to use the tools it still has. I mean, it's basically the same thing with the English attack speed buff. It doesn't have a big telegraph either, but at least it requires you to position and time it and use micro. There's some skill expression there, and because of that, people don't flock to it the same way they did with the literal delete button. This isn't just for the Lancaster. This is with every single strong or overtuned or OP thing that any Civ has. They did the same thing with the 2 Glocks. It's the Golden Horde. Whenever you could spend stone and produce 3 of those overpowered Torgods, infinitely, by the way. The moment that got nerfed into the ground, not even into the ground, it just got nerfed and it wasn't as overpowered as it usually is. Or was. They just declared the race unplayable and then immediately was like, okay, well, I don't want to play the Civ anymore. There's nothing good about it. This community doesn't chase skillful, strong races. It chases effortless cheese. And in a game where the devs keep rewarding low interaction strategies, that instinct just keeps getting worse. Just generally, just keeps ruining the game. So you put it all together. A Siege rework that gutted one of the only systems keeping the game varied and keeping the Imperial Age interesting. A meta that's boiled down to rush or cav because everything else gets punished. A ranked map pool that hard codes those playstyles into the ladder. And a player base that will always choose the path of least effort and then defend it to the death. And you just end up with a game that feels stale, predictable, and honestly just exhausting to play. If you're still having fun with AOE 4, genuinely, I'm glad that you are. But for me, and for a lot of people, it feels like we're watching a game that used to have potential slowly suffocate under bad design and a community that refuses to demand better. I honestly want to drop the game, and I put 1,000 hours into it. It's just sad, and that's just where I'm at with it. So if you like this video, leave a like, comment, subscribe. I have it on good authority that 100% of you guys that are watching these videos are not subscribed. Pretty insane.